Sarah Martinez shuffled through the automatic doors of the grocery store. Her shoulders hunched forward under the weight of invisible burdens. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her clothes hung loose on her small frame. To anyone watching, she looked like countless other tired mothers, struggling to make it through another day. Her shopping cart squeaked as she pushed it down the cereal aisle, checking items off a crumpled list with shaking hands. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that made her pale skin look almost translucent. She moved slowly, deliberately, as if every step required careful consideration. Other shoppers barely glanced her way, dismissing her as just another exhausted woman trying to feed her family on a tight budget. Sarah had perfected this appearance over the past 18 months. The slight tremor in her hands, the way she favored her left leg, the careful movements that suggested chronic pain. Every detail was calculated. She had studied how trauma affected the body, how exhaustion manifested in posture and gait, how vulnerability looked when it wore civilian clothes. Behind the tired facade, her mind operated with military precision. She cataloged every face, every exit, every potential threat or advantage. Years of elite training had taught her to assess situations in seconds, to identify danger before it fully materialized. But today, like every day for the past year and a half, she was hunting something far more dangerous than enemy combatants in foreign territories. The man she was tracking had no idea that the woman buying generic breakfast cereal and counting coupons was Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, one of the Navy's most decorated special operations personnel. He couldn't know that beneath her oversized sweater, old scars told stories of missions in places that didn't exist on any map. He wouldn't suspect that the woman who looked like she might cry at any moment had once single-handedly extracted a high-value target from a compound surrounded by hostile forces. Thomas Brennan moved through his daily routine with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. As a decorated police detective, he had built a reputation for solving difficult cases and mentoring young officers. His colleagues respected him, his supervisors praised his dedication, and the community saw him as a pillar of law and order. But Sarah knew the truth that lurked beneath his polished exterior. For 3 years, Brennan had been systematically stalking and terrorizing military families, particularly targeting the wives and children of deployed service members. He used his law enforcement connections to access personal information, his police training to avoid detection, and his position of authority to discredit anyone who tried to report his behavior. The victims were scattered across multiple jurisdictions, making it nearly impossible for any single department to see the pattern. Sarah's own sister had been one of his targets. Lisa Martinez Cooper, married to a Marine sergeant deployed overseas, had endured months of harassment that escalated from anonymous phone calls to break-ins that left no evidence but missing personal items. When Lisa tried to report the incidents, Brennan's influence within the department ensured her complaints were buried or dismissed as the paranoid fears of a lonely military spouse. The breaking point came when Lisa's 8-year-old daughter started having nightmares about the man who watched her from across the street during recess. School officials assured Lisa that security was tight, but the little girl's descriptions were too detailed, too consistent to dismiss. When Lisa found evidence that someone had been in her daughter's bedroom while they slept, she made a desperate call to her sister. Sarah had been between deployments when Lisa's tearful phone call came through. Her sister's voice shook as she described feeling trapped, watched, hunted. Local authorities either couldn't or wouldn't help, and Lisa was afraid that escalating her complaints would put her daughter in greater danger. Sarah listened with growing rage as her sister described, feeling powerless in her own home, jumping at every shadow, checking locks obsessively, living in constant fear. That night, Sarah made a decision that would define the next phase of her life. She requested extended leave, citing family emergency. Her commanding officers, aware of her exemplary service record and the stress of repeated deployments, granted the request without question. They assumed she needed time to decompress, to reconnect with family, to heal from the invisible wounds that special operations personnel often carried. Sarah moved to a small apartment across town from her sister, close enough to provide support, but far enough to avoid drawing attention to the connection. She crafted her new identity carefully. A woman recovering from a difficult divorce, struggling with depression and anxiety. Barely managing to keep her head above water, she studied the mannerisms of trauma survivors, practiced the subtle signs of someone whose confidence had been systematically destroyed. The transformation required her to suppress every instinct that had kept her alive through years of dangerous missions. Instead of the hypervigilant awareness that came naturally to special operations personnel, she had to project the glazed, overwhelmed look of someone barely coping with daily life. Instead of the controlled, efficient movements that marked her as a trained warrior, she adopted the hesitant, careful gait of someone afraid of drawing attention. Sarah began her surveillance of Detective Brennan by studying his patterns from a distance. She learned that he stopped at this particular grocery store every Tuesday evening after his shift, always buying the same items, always using the self-checkout lanes to avoid interaction with staff. He lived alone in a tidy house in a middle-class neighborhood, drove a well-maintained sedan, and maintained the appearance of a model citizen. But Sarah noticed things that others missed. The way his eyes followed young women in the store, cataloging details with predatory focus. The fact that his grocery trips always coincided with times when military families would be shopping for weekly supplies. The subtle bulge of recording equipment in his jacket pocket, disguised as a phone or wallet. As she moved through the store, Sarah allowed herself to drift closer to where Brennan examined produce with theatrical concentration. She could feel his attention shift to her, studying her with the same calculating gaze she had observed him using on other potential targets. Her instincts screamed warnings, but she forced herself to maintain her vulnerable facade, to present herself as exactly the type of victim he preferred. The first contact came as she struggled to reach a box of crackers from a high shelf. Her performance was perfect. The slight wince as she stretched, the frustrated sigh when her fingertips barely brushed the box, the embarrassed flush when she realized someone was watching. Brennan appeared beside her with practiced timing, his smile warm and concerned as he easily retrieved the item she couldn't reach. "Here you go," he said, his voice carrying the authoritative kindness that made people trust law enforcement. "These shelves are way too high. I don't know what the store designers were thinking." Sarah accepted the box with grateful surprise that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you so much. I swear I'm shrinking every year." Her laugh was nervous, self-deprecating, the sound of someone who had learned to make herself smaller in every possible way. Brennan's response was perfectly calibrated. Concerned, but not pushy. Helpful, but not overwhelming. He asked if she needed help with anything else. Mentioned that he came to this store regularly and had noticed how poorly organized it was. His manner suggested someone genuinely interested in helping, not someone cataloging details about a potential victim. But Sarah recognized the techniques he was using because she had been trained in similar approaches for intelligence gathering. The way he positioned himself to seem non-threatening while maintaining a clear view of her cart's contents. The casual questions that seemed like small talk but actually gathered information about her living situation, her schedule, her support network. She played her part perfectly, offering just enough information to seem trusting while maintaining the appropriate level of caution for someone who had learned to be wary of strangers. She mentioned being new to the area, struggling to adjust after a difficult life change, finding it hard to meet people. Every detail was designed to make her seem isolated and vulnerable, while establishing a plausible reason for future encounters. When they parted ways in the parking lot, Sarah made sure Brennan saw her struggle with loading groceries into an older car that she had specifically chosen for its worn appearance. She fumbled with her keys, dropped her purse, and generally presented the image of someone barely managing the simple tasks of daily life. Through her peripheral vision, she watched him memorize her license plate number and note which direction she drove when leaving the lot. Over the following weeks, Sarah carefully orchestrated a series of seemingly chance encounters. She appeared at the coffee shop Brennan frequented, always ordering the same simple drink and sitting alone with a book she never seemed to actually read. She shopped at the hardware store, where he bought supplies, asking hesitant questions about basic home repairs that suggested she was living alone and struggling with maintenance issues. Each encounter built on the previous one, creating a narrative of a woman who was isolated, overwhelmed, and gradually beginning to trust the kind detective who always seemed to appear when she needed help. Brennan responded exactly as Sarah had predicted, slowly increasing the frequency of their accidental meetings and beginning to insert himself into her routine with offers of assistance. The breakthrough came when Sarah staged a minor car trouble incident in the grocery store parking lot where they had first met. She timed it perfectly for Brennan's usual shopping day, ensuring he would find her standing beside her car with the hood up, looking helpless and frustrated. His response was immediate and decisive, the helpful law enforcement officer coming to the rescue of a woman in distress. As Brennan examined her engine with professional competence, Sarah watched him work with the satisfaction of a hunter who had successfully baited her trap. He had no idea that the apparently random mechanical failure had been carefully engineered, that the vulnerable woman he was helping was actually documenting every word of their conversation, every detail of his behavior. When he offered to follow her home to make sure she arrived safely, Sarah accepted with the grateful relief of someone who had learned to appreciate any gesture of kindness. She gave him an address 3 blocks from her actual apartment, a location she had chosen specifically for the surveillance opportunities it would provide. That night, as Sarah sat in her real apartment reviewing the day's interactions, she felt the familiar surge of satisfaction that came from a mission moving according to plan. Phase 1 was complete. She had successfully established herself as a potential target and gained Brennan's attention. Now, the real work would begin, as she drew him deeper into her web, while gathering the evidence needed to expose his pattern of predatory behavior. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lisa, asking how she was adjusting to civilian life. Sarah smiled grimly as she typed back a reassuring response. Her sister would never know the lengths Sarah was willing to go to protect her family, the risks she was taking to ensure that no other military families would suffer at Brennan's hands. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she balanced the need to appear increasingly vulnerable while maintaining the operational security that would keep her alive. But tonight, for the first time in months, Sarah felt like herself again, not the exhausted woman from the grocery store, but Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, on a mission that mattered more than any she had ever undertaken. 3 weeks into her operation, Sarah had become a fixture in Detective Thomas Brennan's routine. She had perfected the art of appearing at the right places at precisely the right times. Always looking slightly lost. Always grateful for his help. Her apartment had been carefully staged to tell the story of a woman barely holding her life together. Unpacked boxes suggesting recent upheaval. Minimal furniture that spoke to financial struggles, and personal items strategically placed to reinforce her cover story of a difficult divorce. The relationship progressed exactly as Sarah had predicted. Brennan's initial helpfulness had evolved into a pattern of regular check-ins, always disguised as coincidental encounters or neighborly concern. He had begun offering more personal assistance, helping with grocery bags when her chronic pain made lifting difficult, recommending local services when she mentioned needing repairs, sharing advice about navigating the area as a newcomer. Sarah documented everything with the precision of a military intelligence officer. Hidden cameras throughout her staged apartment captured Brennan's behavior during his visits. Audio recording devices, concealed in items he would never think to examine, preserved every conversation. She maintained detailed logs of their interactions, noting patterns in his approach, cataloging the personal information he tried to extract, tracking how his behavior shifted as he believed she was becoming more dependent on his help. The first major breakthrough came when Brennan offered to help her feel more secure in her new home. He suggested security improvements with the authority of someone who understood criminal behavior, recommending specific locks, alarm systems, and safety procedures. But Sarah recognized the advice for what it really was: intelligence gathering, disguised as protection. Every recommendation gave him insight into her security measures. Every suggestion revealed potential vulnerabilities he could exploit later. When he offered to install new locks himself, citing his experience and desire to help a friend avoid contractor expenses, Sarah accepted with the appropriate level of grateful relief. She watched with professional interest as Brennan examined her apartment with the trained eye of a predator mapping terrain. He noted window access, escape routes, and sightlines with the same attention to detail Sarah had been taught to apply to hostile environments. The lock installation became a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Brennan worked with competent efficiency while maintaining a steady stream of conversation designed to elicit personal information. He asked about her family with sympathetic concern, inquired about her daily routine with protective interest, and explored her social connections with the subtle thoroughness of an interrogator. Sarah provided carefully crafted responses that painted a picture of isolation and vulnerability. She mentioned family members who lived far away and rarely called, described a social circle that had dissolved during her divorce, and referenced a work situation that kept her busy but didn't provide meaningful connections. Every detail was designed to reinforce Brennan's assessment that she was alone, unprotected, and unlikely to have anyone who would notice if something happened to her. But the most revealing moment came when Brennan discovered a framed photo that Sarah had placed strategically on a bookshelf. The picture showed her in military dress uniform, but she had carefully altered it to make the rank insignia indistinct and her face slightly blurred. When Brennan asked about it, Sarah's response was perfectly calculated to draw his interest while misdirecting his suspicions. "That's from my brother's wedding," she said with a sad smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "He insisted I wear his uniform for pictures since he couldn't make it home in time." I felt ridiculous, but it made him happy to know someone was representing the family properly. The lie was layered with enough truth to be believable while serving multiple purposes. It explained the military connection without revealing Sarah's actual service, suggested she had family ties to the armed forces without making her seem like an active threat, and reinforced her image as someone who prioritized others' needs over her own comfort. Brennan's reaction confirmed Sarah's assessment of his targeting preferences. His questions became more focused, probing for details about her brother's deployment status, her own relationship with military culture, and her feelings about the sacrifices required of military families. She could see him cataloging information, building a profile that would determine whether she fit his preferred victim type. Over the following days, Sarah noticed the subtle changes that indicated Brennan was moving into the next phase of his predatory pattern. The frequency of his chance encounters increased, but the interactions became shorter and more purposeful. He began testing her boundaries with small requests and minor impositions, gauging her willingness to accommodate his needs over her own comfort. The shift was almost imperceptible to someone not trained to recognize manipulation tactics. Brennan started arriving earlier for their planned meetings, then apologizing for the inconvenience, while noting that she didn't seem to mind. He began suggesting activities that required her to adjust her schedule, then expressing appreciation for her flexibility. Each successful boundary test paved the way for larger impositions, creating a pattern where his needs gradually took precedence over her own. Sarah played her part flawlessly, responding with the confused gratitude of someone who had learned to doubt her own instincts. She apologized for inconveniences that weren't her fault, thanked him for pointing out problems she hadn't realized existed, and gradually adopted the hypervigilant people-pleasing behavior that characterized many abuse survivors. The psychological pressure of maintaining her cover was unlike anything Sarah had experienced in her military career. In combat situations, the threat was external and clearly defined. Enemy forces, hostile environments, mission objectives with quantifiable success metrics. But this operation required her to project vulnerability while maintaining operational awareness, to appear weak while staying strong enough to complete the mission. The most challenging aspect was suppressing her natural responses to Brennan's manipulation attempts. Years of military training had conditioned her to meet challenges with direct action, to respond to threats with decisive force, to maintain control over her environment through superior preparation and training. Playing the role of a victim required her to override every instinct that had kept her alive through multiple deployments. But the psychological discipline that made Sarah an effective special operations soldier also enabled her to maintain her cover under increasing pressure. She had been trained to compartmentalize emotions, to function effectively while experiencing extreme stress, to maintain focus on mission objectives despite personal discomfort. These skills proved invaluable as Brennan's behavior became more invasive and controlling. The next escalation came when Brennan suggested that Sarah might benefit from learning basic self-defense techniques. He framed the offer as practical assistance for a woman living alone, citing crime statistics and sharing anecdotes about cases he had worked involving home invasions and stalking incidents. His manner was protective and educational, but Sarah recognized the underlying assessment he was conducting. The self-defense sessions took place in Brennan's garage, which he had equipped with basic training mats and equipment. Sarah approached these sessions with particular caution, knowing they would provide Brennan with detailed intelligence about her physical capabilities, combat reflexes, and potential threat level. She had to demonstrate enough competence to be believable while concealing the lethal skills that would immediately expose her true identity. The challenge required Sarah to essentially perform physical incompetence while maintaining enough authenticity to avoid suspicion. She allowed Brennan to teach her basic techniques that she could perform in her sleep, responding with the awkward enthusiasm of someone discovering new abilities. When he demonstrated holds and defensive positions, she had to fight every trained response that would have resulted in his immediate incapacitation. During one session, Brennan's instruction crossed into inappropriate territory as he used the training scenarios to establish unwanted physical contact. His hands lingered during position adjustments, his demonstrations involved unnecessarily close proximity, and his corrections required physical guidance that had nothing to do with effective self-defense instruction. Sarah endured the contact with the stoic professionalism that had carried her through survival training and hostile interrogation exercises. But she also documented everything, knowing that this behavior represented a significant escalation in Brennan's pattern and would provide crucial evidence of his predatory methods. The breakthrough she had been waiting for came during their fourth training session. Brennan's confidence in his assessment of her had grown to the point where he began sharing information that revealed his true intentions. Under the guise of teaching her about criminal mindset, he described stalking behaviors with an intimacy that could only come from personal experience. He explained how predators selected victims, emphasizing the importance of choosing targets who were isolated and unlikely to be believed if they reported suspicious behavior. He detailed surveillance techniques, describing how someone could monitor a victim's routine without detection. He outlined psychological manipulation strategies, explaining how predators built trust before exploiting vulnerability. Throughout these discussions, Brennan presented himself as the expert protector, sharing hard-won knowledge with someone he cared about protecting. But Sarah recognized the content for what it really was, a predator's confession disguised as education, delivered to someone he believed was too naive and grateful to recognize the threat he represented. The sessions also provided Sarah with crucial intelligence about Brennan's methods and previous victims. His examples were too detailed and specific to be purely theoretical, containing elements that could only come from direct experience. He described victim responses with clinical accuracy, referenced specific locations with unnecessary precision, and demonstrated knowledge of police investigation procedures that suggested he had successfully avoided detection in the past. Sarah began cross-referencing the information Brennan revealed with missing person reports, unsolved stalking cases, and incident reports from military family support networks. A pattern emerged that confirmed her worst suspicions about the scope of his activities. Brennan hadn't just targeted her sister and a few other families. He had been systematically hunting military wives and children across multiple jurisdictions for years. The evidence was damning but incomplete. Sarah needed irrefutable proof that would survive legal scrutiny and ensure Brennan's conviction. She needed him to reveal details about specific victims, provide evidence of his surveillance activities, and demonstrate his methods in a way that could be documented and verified. The opportunity came when Brennan suggested they should practice self-defense scenarios in more realistic settings. He proposed that they visit the locations where she normally spent time, the grocery store, coffee shop, parking areas, so he could help her identify potential danger zones and escape routes. Sarah agreed with the eager gratitude of someone who finally felt like she had found protection in a dangerous world. But she also recognized the proposal for what it really was: Brennan's attempt to conduct detailed reconnaissance of her actual routine while maintaining the pretense of providing security education. As they planned these excursions, Sarah felt the familiar anticipation that came before the decisive phase of any operation. All the careful preparation, patient surveillance, and psychological manipulation had brought her to this moment. Soon, Detective Thomas Brennan would discover that the exhausted, vulnerable woman he had been grooming was actually the most dangerous person he would ever encounter. But first, she had to survive whatever came next without breaking character. Maintain her cover while gathering the final evidence needed to destroy him, and ensure that when the trap finally closed, there would be no possibility of escape for the predator who had terrorized her family and countless others. The final phase of Sarah's operation began on a rainy Thursday evening when Detective Thomas Brennan made his fatal mistake. For 6 weeks, he had been slowly escalating his behavior, testing boundaries and building trust with the woman he believed was his perfect victim. His confidence had grown to the point where he no longer saw the need for careful subtlety. Tonight, he would reveal himself completely, never suspecting that every word and action was being recorded by someone whose patience and preparation far exceeded his own. Sarah had spent the day carefully staging the scene that would serve as Brennan's undoing. Her apartment had been equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment, hidden so expertly that even a trained law enforcement officer would never detect them. Every angle was covered, every conversation would be captured, and every piece of evidence would be admissible in court. The evening started according to their established routine. Brennan arrived under the pretense of checking the security improvements they had discussed, bringing dinner from the restaurant, where he had insisted they should become regular customers. His manner was relaxed and proprietary, the demeanor of someone who felt completely in control of the situation. But Sarah noticed subtle changes in his behavior that indicated tonight would be different. His eyes moved around her apartment with renewed interest, cataloging details he had previously overlooked. His questions became more personal and invasive, probing for information about her deepest fears and vulnerabilities. Most tellingly, he had disabled his police radio and left his service weapon in the car. Preparations that suggested he planned activities that couldn't be interrupted or explained. The conversation during dinner followed a script that Sarah recognized from her research into predatory behavior. Brennan steered the discussion toward topics designed to isolate her psychologically, questioning whether she could really trust her distant family members, suggesting that her ex-husband's criticisms might have been valid, implying that she was fortunate to have found someone who genuinely cared about her welfare. Each comment was calculated to erode her self-confidence and increase her emotional dependence on his approval. In any other context, Sarah would have recognized these tactics immediately and responded accordingly. But maintaining her cover required her to absorb the psychological assault while appearing to internalize his manipulative messages. The transformation in Brennan became more pronounced as the evening progressed. The helpful, protective persona he had maintained for weeks gradually dissolved, replaced by something colder and more calculating. His voice took on a different tone, more authoritative, less concerned with her comfort. His body language shifted from respectful distance to invasive proximity, testing how much space he could claim without triggering obvious resistance. Sarah played her part perfectly, responding with the confusion and compliance that Brennan expected from his victims. She thanked him for his honesty about her character flaws, apologized for being too sensitive when he criticized her appearance, and gradually retreated into the apologetic deference that he was conditioning her to adopt. But beneath her vulnerable exterior, Sarah's tactical mind was operating at peak efficiency. She tracked Brennan's position relative to exits and potential weapons, monitored his stress levels through micro-expressions and vocal patterns, and constantly assessed the optimal timing for revealing her true identity and taking control of the situation. The moment of truth came when Brennan's phone rang with what he claimed was an emergency call from work. Sarah listened to a one-sided conversation that was clearly fabricated. The pauses were too perfect, the responses too rehearsed, the concern too theatrical. When he hung up, his expression combined regret with poorly concealed satisfaction. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I have to respond to a situation. There's been a break-in at a house where a military wife lives alone with her kids. The responding officers requested detective backup because they think it might be connected to other incidents we've been tracking." The lie was masterfully constructed, playing on Sarah's supposed connection to military families while establishing a time frame that would explain his absence if anyone asked. But Sarah recognized the story for what it really was: Brennan's exit strategy for the evening's planned activities, creating an alibi that would account for his whereabouts while deflecting suspicion about his true intentions. "I understand completely," Sarah replied with the selfless concern that he expected. "You have to help those families. I can't imagine how terrifying that must be for them." Brennan's response revealed the depth of his psychological manipulation. Instead of leaving immediately, he began expressing conflicted feelings about abandoning her when she seemed particularly vulnerable. He worried aloud about her safety, questioned whether she would be able to sleep without feeling anxious, and suggested that perhaps he should stay to ensure her peace of mind. The performance was designed to make Sarah feel responsible for his decision to stay, transforming what appeared to be his sacrifice into her request. She was supposed to insist that he remain, to prioritize her emotional needs over his professional duties, to become complicit in whatever, followed by explicitly asking for his continued presence. But Sarah had studied Brennan's methods extensively, and she knew exactly where this manipulation was leading. Instead of taking the bait, she responded with a solution that would serve her operational needs while appearing to support his fabricated dilemma. "What if I came with you?" she suggested hesitantly. "I know I couldn't help with police work, but I could wait in the car. Sometimes, it helps to have someone there when you're dealing with difficult situations, and honestly, I think I'd feel safer knowing where you are than staying here, wondering if you're okay." The proposal caught Brennan off guard, because it didn't fit any of the response patterns he had been cultivating. Sarah had offered a solution that appeared to prioritize his needs while actually disrupting his plans completely. She had volunteered to accompany him to a crime scene that didn't exist, creating a situation where he would have to either abandon his fabricated emergency or escalate his deception to dangerous levels. Sarah watched Brennan's face as he processed this unexpected development. She could see him calculating alternatives, weighing the risks of different approaches, struggling to maintain his helpful facade while adapting to circumstances he hadn't anticipated. His hesitation lasted only seconds, but it was long enough for Sarah to confirm that tonight had been planned as something more than a social visit. "That's incredibly sweet of you," Brennan finally responded. "But I can't expose you to potentially dangerous situations. What if the suspect is still in the area? What if there are complications that require backup units? I couldn't forgive myself if something happened to you because I was selfish enough to want company." The refusal was wrapped in protective concern, but Sarah heard the underlying panic of someone whose carefully laid plans had been disrupted. Brennan needed her to remain in the apartment, isolated and vulnerable, for whatever he had intended to accomplish tonight. Her suggestion had forced him to choose between maintaining his cover story and achieving his actual objectives. Sarah pressed the advantage with the innocent persistence of someone who genuinely wanted to help. "But wouldn't it be safer for me to be with a police officer than to stay here alone? I've been having those nightmares again, and I really don't want to spend the evening jumping at every sound." Each word was calculated to increase Brennan's psychological pressure while maintaining her apparent naivety. She was offering logical arguments wrapped in emotional vulnerability, making it difficult for him to refuse without revealing the flaws in his fabricated emergency or exposing his true intentions. The conversation continued for several more minutes, as Brennan attempted to navigate the trap that Sarah had constructed around his own deception. Every response he gave provided additional evidence of his manipulative methods, and every argument he made against her suggestions revealed more about his actual plans for the evening. Finally, Brennan made the decision that would seal his fate. Rather than continuing to argue against her presence at a non-existent crime scene, he chose to abandon the emergency call pretense entirely. His phone rang again, and this time his conversation was designed to release him from the fabricated professional obligation. "Martinez? Yeah, I got the call, but it looks like patrol has the situation under control. The suspect fled before anyone arrived, and the family is secure. Cancel my response. I'll review the report in the morning and coordinate with the other cases then." The second fake conversation was less convincing than the first, rushed and lacking the detail that would characterize a genuine police communication. But it served Brennan's immediate purpose of freeing him to focus entirely on Sarah, while maintaining the pretense that he was making a personal sacrifice to prioritize her needs. "Well, it looks like my evening just opened up," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I guess I can stay and make sure you're feeling settled after all." Sarah accepted his decision with grateful relief, but internally she was preparing for the confrontation that was now inevitable. Brennan had committed himself to remaining in her apartment for the evening, trapped by his own deceptions in a location that she controlled completely. Whatever he had planned to do under cover of his false emergency would now have to happen without the safety net of a plausible alibi. The final hour of Brennan's freedom passed quickly as his behavior became increasingly aggressive and possessive. He began making demands disguised as suggestions, testing her compliance with increasingly inappropriate requests. He questioned her judgment about personal decisions, criticized her independence as dangerous naivety, and gradually established himself as the authority figure whose approval she should seek before making any choices. The psychological pressure was intended to break down her sense of personal autonomy, conditioning her to defer to his wishes and accept his control over her environment. But Sarah endured the assault with the same professional detachment she had applied to survival training, documenting every word while maintaining her vulnerable facade. The end came when Brennan's patience finally ran out and he revealed his true intentions with startling clarity. His protective mask slipped completely as he described what he knew about her daily routine, the personal information he had gathered through surveillance, and the other friends he had helped in similar ways. You see, Sarah, women like you need someone to take care of the decisions that are too complicated or dangerous for you to handle alone. I've been watching you struggle for weeks now, making choices that put you at risk, trusting people who don't have your best interests at heart. Tonight, we're going to establish some new arrangements that will keep you safe and help you understand how much better your life can be when someone who really cares about you is making the important decisions. The words were delivered with calm certainty, the tone of someone explaining obvious facts to a child who needed guidance. But they contained admissions that would destroy Brennan's career and freedom once they were presented in court. He had confessed to surveillance, manipulation, and intentions that clearly constituted stalking and attempted abduction. Sarah's response was perfect in its apparent helplessness. I don't understand what you mean. Are you saying I've been doing something wrong? I thought you were just being nice because you cared about me as a friend. Oh, Sarah, Brennan replied with condescending affection. Friendship is just the beginning. What you need is someone who can provide real protection, real guidance, real commitment to your welfare, someone who understands what you need better than you do and has the strength to ensure you get it. The confession continued as Brennan detailed his expectations for their new relationship, describing restrictions on her movement, communication, and decision-making that clearly constituted imprisonment. He spoke with the casual authority of someone who had done this before, referring to protocols and arrangements that suggested extensive experience with controlling and isolating victims. But the most damning revelation came when Brennan began describing his other success stories. Military wives who had learned to appreciate his protection, families who had benefited from his guidance, situations he had resolved through his special expertise. Each example provided details that could be cross-referenced with missing person cases and unsolved crimes, building a comprehensive picture of predatory behavior spanning multiple years and jurisdictions. Sarah listened with growing satisfaction as Brennan constructed his own prosecution case, providing evidence that would ensure convictions for crimes that had previously gone undetected. When he finally finished his explanation and moved to physically enforce his new authority over her, Sarah was ready. The transformation was instantaneous and complete. The exhausted, vulnerable woman who had gratefully accepted Brennan's help disappeared, replaced by Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, in full operational mode. Her posture straightened, her eyes hardened, and her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to command. Detective Thomas Brennan, she said with deadly calm, you are under arrest for stalking, attempted kidnapping, and conspiracy to commit sexual assault. You have the right to remain silent, though I notice you've chosen to waive that right quite enthusiastically this evening. The shock on Brennan's face was absolute and comical. For a few seconds, he couldn't process what had happened, staring at Sarah as if she had transformed into a completely different person. When understanding finally dawned, his expression cycled through disbelief, rage, and desperate calculation as he searched for some way to regain control of the situation. His first attempt was to reassert his authority through his police credentials, demanding to know who she thought she was and threatening her with arrest for interfering with a law enforcement officer. But Sarah's response demonstrated exactly how thoroughly she had prepared for this moment. I'm someone who's been recording every word you've said for the past 6 weeks, she replied, producing a tablet that displayed multiple camera feeds from around the apartment. Someone who's documented your surveillance activities, your manipulation techniques, and your confession to multiple felonies. Someone whose sister you terrorized for months while hiding behind your badge. The tablet showed Brennan video evidence of his own behavior, the calculating expressions he thought no one could see, The invasive searches of her apartment during previous visits, the moments when his protective facade had slipped to reveal predatory intent. Every frame was time-stamped and backed up to secure servers beyond his reach. Brennan's second strategy was to claim that everything he had done was part of a legitimate police investigation, that his behavior could be explained as undercover work or protective surveillance. But Sarah had anticipated this defense and prepared responses that would demolish it completely. "Interesting theory," she said, producing additional evidence from her operational files. "Except that I've already spoken with your commanding officers, internal affairs investigators, and federal agents who specialize in crimes against military families. They're very interested in your activities, especially after I provided them with evidence linking you to at least 7 other cases involving stalked military spouses." The mention of federal involvement drained the color from Brennan's face as he realized the true scope of the investigation he had walked into. Sarah had not been conducting a lone operation. She had been working with a task force that had been tracking his activities across multiple jurisdictions, gathering evidence that would support prosecutions under both state and federal law. Brennan's final gambit was physical resistance, an attempt to overpower someone he still perceived as a vulnerable woman despite all evidence to the contrary. It was perhaps the most foolish decision of an evening filled with catastrophic choices. Sarah's response was swift, efficient, and devastating. Years of elite military training came into play as she neutralized Brennan's attack with movements that were over before he understood they had begun. Within seconds, he found himself immobilized and secured with restraints that had been hidden in her apartment for exactly this purpose. "Detective Brennan," Sarah said as she contacted the task force members who were waiting nearby. "Meet Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEAL. I've been hunting predators like you in places a lot more dangerous than suburban grocery stores. Did you really think you could outmaneuver someone trained to track and capture enemy operatives in hostile territory?" The arrest that followed was swift and comprehensive. Federal agents secured Brennan, while Sarah provided a complete briefing on the evidence she had gathered. The investigation that she had triggered would eventually uncover a network of crimes spanning multiple states and dozens of victims, leading to convictions that would ensure Brennan never threatened another military family. But for Sarah, the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when she watched her sister Lisa sleep peacefully for the first time in months. The nightmares had stopped, the constant vigilance had relaxed, and the shadow of fear that had hung over their family had finally lifted. The exhausted, vulnerable woman who had shuffled through grocery stores and accepted help from predatory strangers was gone, revealed as the elaborate cover identity of someone far more dangerous than those who had threatened her loved ones. Detective Thomas Brennan had learned too late that appearances could be devastatingly deceptive, and that sometimes the most vulnerable-looking person in the room was actually the apex predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez had completed her most important mission, proving that the deadliest warriors didn't always wear uniforms or carry obvious weapons. Sometimes they hid in plain sight, waiting with infinite patience for justice to be served.